Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to Academic Writing Amplified. I'm Kathy Mazek from Scholar's Voice, and today we are talking about the mid-career burnout or the mid-career slump. Okay, so this might have happened to you. You might be in it right now, or you might be worried about this because you've heard about it. So no matter where you are in your career today, we are going to kind of dig into how the mid-career slump happens and then what to do, like depending on where you are in your career, right, in order to prevent it or get through it, or I guess maybe kind of heal from it. So let's get started. Today, I'm going to be talking about and using the word tenure. And in the North American academic system and in other systems as well, but especially in the US and Canada, the tenure promotion is the first promotion of the tenure track or quote unquote permanent professor job. And that happens often in year 5 or 6 on what we call the tenure track. And what it represents for people who are in a tenure system is a kind of permanency. So before tenure, you are basically trying to prove yourself to the institution. And by winning tenure or gaining tenure, you are given kind of the stamp of approval that says, yes, you are working in the way that we want you to as an institution. You belong here. We want to keep you here. And please keep working for us, right? So that's kind of what tenure means in a very kind of a simple language, but it also means it is much more difficult to fire a person. And it also kind of, if you don't get tenure, then that means that basically you can be given, a certain period of time, often a year. And after that, you will no longer be employed by that university. So, for those of you listening internationally, or if you're super early career and you don't know about this, I wanted to just kind of make that super clear. And then I also wanted to say that when I use the word tenure, I want you to think about your system. And even if you don't use the word tenure, that first big promotion is often kind of an equivalent if you're in Europe or if you're in Australia or if you're in Asia or Africa. These are kind of different moments in the career in the Middle East. It might be called something different in your context. But today I'm calling them tenure, and I'm going to use tenure for short. And I also want to say that usually in a tenure system, then we would call people who are post-tenure or who have one tenure, we would call that mid-career. And so it really runs anywhere from your 5th or 6th year as a full-time professor all the way to like maybe kind of almost forever, right? Like the mid-career is the biggest expanse of your career. Even once you become a full professor in the North American system, we don't necessarily go ahead and say that you are now late career. So really like mid-career refers to the most amount of time that you are in your professorial job. Maybe it could be 15 to 20 years, so it is definitely kind of amorphous, the mid-career time, but it is often a time where I can, as someone who has coached, who has been in this position, and then also who has coached many, many people during their mid-career, it's a time where something distinctive happens that is very different from early career or any of those moments before that first major promotion or that first tenure moment. Okay. So that's just that was 5 minutes to describe what I mean by mid-career. So now let's get into some more details about what happens mid-career and why. So before tenure, before that first big promotion, you are, as I mentioned before, right? Like really often trying to prove yourself, right? Like what you're trying to show with your work is that you are worthy of staying at that institution. Now, of course, not everybody is going to take that tack, but that is what many, many people are thinking when they're thinking about preparing for tenure. They're like, okay, I need to show this institution based on their criteria, which can be sometimes super explicit, sometimes more implicit, based on their criteria that I should be a permanent member of their faculty. So how this translates is that since a lot of times we don't have a clear number of peer-reviewed publications really laid out for us in our tenure guidelines, you basically are thinking, I better just publish as much as I can. Okay. Now, depending on the kind of institution you're at, you might also be really aware of where you are placing your publications, right? Like you might have either heard about or been told directly that your publications need to be first authored or they need to be in a certain type of a journal with a certain R factor, like these kinds of things, like it needs to be a top tier journal, whatever. We have this basically this idea we need to publish as much as we can. And for some of us, we are in institutions that are looking specifically at where we publish and how often we're getting cited. It's a very high pressure situation. So thinking, I'll just do as much as I can and not stop is, a very understandable way to cope with that situation. So you're writing. You're trying to publish everything that you can off your dissertation. If you did a postdoc, you're trying to get all that postdoc work out. At the same time, you're kind of like negotiating who you are as a scholar outside or out from under the wing of your advisor. You're trying to establish a line of research that is your own. And you're pushing really, really hard. In many places, they want to see that you have been able to get grants and sometimes really big grants. At the same time, they might, unfortunately, be spending a lot or weighing a lot your student evaluations. And so you also need to be a great teacher. And it might be the first time that you're teaching, right? There's just a lot of pressure early career and a lot of pressure pre-tenure. And all of that pressure is kind of undergirded by this belief that you will only be safe to make the choices that you want to make in your career once you get tenure. Okay. And that kind of yearning for safety or working really, really hard for safety will lead many, many people to overwork. I mean, we have a culture of overwork anyway in academia, and that yearning for the safety that tenure supposedly provides can make you overwork even more. There is a deadline, and many academics are kind of grateful to have a deadline, right? Like, okay, by this date, I need to put in my tenure packet. So that means I need to get all of these things done. I need to get publications submitted. I need to get things out. Maybe I need to write my first book. So many things. We need all of that to happen by the time we go up. And so we think, well, it's worth it. I'm just going to work my butt off until I get tenure. So then you get tenure. And what happens? Well, you realize that things are different and also exactly the same. So let me explain what I mean. When you get tenure or when you get that promotion, and certainly in the tenure system, tenure means a certain kind of stability. It means a certain kind of guarantee of your position. It means in some sense that safety that you've been striving to get. And so in that sense, things are different, right? Like I wouldn't say that you're like completely safe, forever, but you feel safer. Your position is more secure. And also at the same time, things are not different. So if you said yes to many things, if you loaded your plate with lots of collaborations and projects and admin and service and teaching and all the things, they are still there once you get tenure. Tenure does not erase anything or give you a fresh start in any way. So your habits pre-tenure are the same post-tenure. Your writing pre-tenure is the same post-tenure. Your schedule and how you hold boundaries is the same pre-tenure as it is post-tenure, unless you actively work to change all of those things. So another thing that can happen, or in addition to that, right? So like you got tenure, awesome. You get some amount of safety and security. We'll just put a little question mark in a parenthesis after that. But okay, that's a difference. But the workload is not different. And in fact, the workload continues to be very, very heavy. And the reason is that now you are eligible to sit on committees that you weren't eligible to sit on before. You are expected in many places to now take care of and shelter your junior faculty from too much work. Whether you had been sheltered or not, there's kind of this expectation. You're expected now to maybe take on some administrative role, right? Like maybe they don't make you the department chair the next day, but maybe an associate chairship, maybe the head of this program. Maybe now you're the director of this program. These kinds of things, these administrative roles that make universities run. Sometimes we are protected from them pre-tenure and we are not protected from them post-tenure. And in fact, we are kind of obliged to, or there is some line of thinking that says you are now obligated to carry an even bigger administrative burden than you carried before. So things are different and they're not different. And you hyped tenure up so much in your mind and you ran so fast to get there that you get it and then you might collapse. Like if you think of when you watch a sprint, right? Like when you watch someone sprinting, like the 100-meter dash, on the other side of the 100-meter dash, they take a couple of big strides and then bend over and breathe, right? That is what getting tenure is like. You might like keep going with a certain amount of momentum and then you stop and you're trying to catch your breath. But no one's stopping the workload and no one is lightening your burden. And you must continue on. So what happens is sometimes immediately after you get tenure, you have a kind of a moment where you're kind of like, yay, and also now what, right? And that almost like a breakdown kind of questioning my life choices thing comes maybe a year, 2, maybe 3 years after you get tenure. And those 2 years are filled with more things on your plate and maybe even like headed farther down a path away from what you want. And what I mean by what you want is what you want to be working on, because sometimes what happens pre-tenure is that we are so focused on getting just any publication out that we can, that we might actually produce work that we're not that interested in studying anymore. So oftentimes in mid-career or in post-tenure, we see people kind of wanting to do disciplinary pivots or research line pivots. And they don't know how, or they feel like, oh my gosh, I've invested so much of my career in this line of research. Now I want to change to this. And what does that mean? And sunk costs and all the things, right? At the same time, you continue to get older and more mature as a human. And so you are less and less tolerant of BS as you continue throughout your career. And you will find that mid-career is full of people in their 40s who are like tired of taking it from other people and are much less tolerant than they were earlier in their lives. And all of these things add up to kind of a recipe for mid-career burnout. It comes from having overworked so hard and so long to get tenure, combined with maybe you're not doing exactly what you want because you didn't feel safe to say no to things pre-tenure, and combined also with the fact that your workload pre-tenure is the same as your workload post-tenure, or maybe it's even heavier post-tenure. And so you're like, wait a minute, I worked so hard to get this distinction. And what has it gotten me? I still am overworking, or I still overloaded. So all of these things add up to this possible burnout or breakdown kind of moment. And what can happen, and what often does happen in mid-career, is we really start to question. And many of us start to question, like, do I even want to be here? Is academia for me? Is this what I want to keep doing with my life? And the more specialized and smart and good you are at being a scholar, the more that question might come up for you. So you might think that people who aren't very successful in academia are thinking about leaving, but actually what we see is like the very successful people are the ones thinking about leaving, because they're like, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm too smart for this. I'm too prepared for this. I've worked too hard to be treated this way, or to have a schedule that looks like this, or to carry all the burdens of my department, right? So again, all of these things add up to what can be a mid-career breakdown. And what I want to tell you is that you do not have to have a mid-career breakdown. So even though what I just described is very typical of many, many people, and some of you are listening and you're nodding your heads and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's what happened to me. At the same time, you don't have to go through that. And that's what I want to talk about next. I want to talk about if you're in that right now, if you're feeling it, I want to talk about, or I want to invite you to some ways that might help you fix it. And if you aren't there yet, then I want to talk to you about what you can do now to make sure that the mid-career is lovely and nourishing and joyful, and not the reason to want to throw everything out the window and, start a bakery. Although starting a bakery is a perfectly wonderful idea. All right. So let's start with if you're pre-tenure right now and you don't want to do this mid-career slump or a mid-career burnout. If you're pre-tenure right now, what you need to do in order to avoid a mid-career burnout is that you need to start making choices differently now. So this idea that we get all of this safety from having tenure is, as I've mentioned before many times, both absolutely true and also not true. So if you're thinking like, well, I can't say no to these things because these people might be evaluating me for tenure and they'll think I'm not a team player, that kind of thing. They will still think that about you after you're tenured. So if you're worried about that, like, yes, that can happen, but it can always happen. People who want to throw you under the bus can always find a way to throw you under the bus, whether you're tenured or not. And yes, there is absolutely a distinction. It is harder to get you fired, right? If you're tenured, so that's real. But also, I just want you to know that you will disappoint people by saying no at every career stage. And that is something that you kind of have to learn how to deal with and process for yourself. And similarly, if you're making scholarly choices, like your line of research or what you're saying in the field is controversial or disruptive, it will be controversial, disruptive before you get tenure and also after. So waiting to get tenure, I understand it. Like I totally understand it. And I'm also offering you the idea, or I'm inviting you to think about the fact that tenure alone does not solve the safety problem. That the safety problem, especially for scholars of color and queer scholars, is a bigger systemic problem that is not only solved or is not solved at all by tenure. It is somewhat helped perhaps by tenure. So I wanted to kind of say that. So you need to start making choices pre-tenure in the same way that you want to continue making choices post-tenure. So if you want to work fewer hours, you want to feel less like overburdened and like your work is dripping into your nights and weekends, that's a problem to solve now, not to wait until post-tenure. So the kinds of things we talk about a lot on this podcast, our Navigate program is something that would really help you. Navigate will help you no matter where you are in your career, especially around boundaries and time management and making time for writing and publication, early career, mid-career, late career, and we have people take the program at all stages. And what I'm saying for you right now is if you're trying to avoid the mid-career slump, then solving some of these decision-making or getting better at decision-making earlier is the way to do it. So that you are not like dragging all of your fear-based decision-making with you through the whole tenure process and into post-tenure, because that's what is creating that mid-career slump or the mid-career breakdown. Okay. So that's for my pre-tenure folks. If you are in the slump right now, if you're asking yourself, am I burnout? Usually it means you probably are, or at least you're getting close. So it's time to take some action. And what you need to do mid-career, if you're in the slump or in the burnout, is to realign. And what that means is taking this big picture look at your career and making decisions about what you want and realigning your activities, the things you do in your career, so that they are aligned with what you want. The scholar you want to be, the kind of job you want to have, the everyday activities you want to do, because the everyday activities add up to the career. So if you're hanging on to the career but hating the everyday activities, it's the wrong career, or you're doing it in a way that is not going to be sustainable for you, because that will also lead to burnout. So if you're in the mid-career slump right now, it is time to realign. It's time to really, if you can, take some time away from your everyday life and do some deep thinking about what you want from this career. Because only when you can like articulate what you want, can you make it happen for yourself. I believe that once you figure out what you want, you not only can make it happen, but you are then obligated to make it happen. You're obligated to yourself to make it happen. And so you will find the way to do it. Absolutely. So to recap and wrap this episode, the reasons for the mid-career slump or the post-tenure slump are so understandable. The career path, the trajectory is kind of created so that we run so hard that once we cross the finish line, we collapse. It's created for that. And you can do something different. You can do something different if you're pre-tenure right now by making choices based, instead of in fear and in fear of not getting tenure, making choices that are aligned with your academic mission statement and your values. And if you're in the slump right now or you're in the burnout right now, I invite you to think about what you want and realign your career with that. I have some tools for you if that is your situation. So if you are mid-career right now, and whether you're in the slump or whether you're like, wow, I got through the slump, but I still feel like I need to realign and rethink, I want to invite you to join me in my free video and private podcast series called Mid-Career Magic. Now, if you listened to last week's podcast episode, you know that I am retiring our beloved Elevate mid-career program. But we're not retiring it without one last cohort and a big celebration. And part of our celebration to kind of kick off the enrollment in our final cohort of Elevate. Actually, we're calling it the Legacy cohort. That's the name of the cohort. Part of the celebration is I really wanted to offer you a free series. I haven't done a private podcast series in a while. We had done them before for other kind of launches of Elevate. I wanted to do new content and create something new for you. So if you are mid-career, then I invite you to receive our Mid-Career Magic video series and private podcast. And the way that you can get that delivered right to your inbox is by signing up for the Elevate waitlist. So we are not going to be offering our Mid-Career Magic video series and private podcast publicly. They are all going to be private YouTube videos that you'll need the link to see, or, this private podcast so you can listen on your favorite podcast app. We're not doing a big public thing. We are just doing this to the people who want the invite to the party. So if that's you, then the way to get the invite to the party is to sign up for our Elevate waitlist. By doing so, you'll get our Mid-Career Magic private series, and you will also get all the information about our very last cohort of our Elevate program, which I'm going to run it. So I'll be the head coach on that program. All the group coaching sessions will be run by me, and all the one-on-one coaching will also be done by me. It's a 6-month program that starts October 24th and runs until mid-March or so. And it's a combination of group coaching and one-on-one coaching, where we are going to walk through how you can up-level your mid-career. So that's our Elevate program. And if it sounds interesting to you at all, please get on the wait list. All you got to do is go to scholarsvoice.org/elevate, and you will find a button at the top of the page that says join the wait list, and you can click on that button. Clicking on that button means that on August 29th, when we start our Mid-Career Magic video series, you will get it right to your inbox. So you'll click on the button, you'll enter your email, and Mid-Career Magic will start August 29th. It's totally free. You'll get access via email. And then you'll also be getting all the information about our final Elevate cohort. So I invite you to do that. And I invite you to think about the fact that you don't have to do the mid-career burnout like everybody else does. You can do your career differently. You can make it happen for yourself. You can create magic mid-career instead of creating slump. So join me, get on the wait list for Elevate. And I'll say too, since you're in the deep end of the podcast now, this is the last time we're going to be offering Elevate, and this is the last time I'm going to be talking about it here on the podcast. So if you're a kind of a devout podcast listener, you will notice that these last 2 episodes, last week and this week, are the only time I'm talking about this special Elevate last cohort. And then starting next week, I'm going to be talking about writing and publishing. And I have some great content coming up, including interviews with special guests. I'm very excited. But if you are mid-career and you want to make sure you hear more of my mid-career content, then I need you to get on the wait list for Elevate by going to scholarsvoice.org/elevate. That's what's going to get you our private Mid-Career Magic series that starts August 29th. I hope you're having such a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.